Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. If you're a history buff, or honestly, if you're just looking to fall asleep to the entire story of Atlantis, the lost civilization, you are absolutely in the right place. We're going to take a mesmerizing journey into what is arguably the ultimate ancient history mystery, a story about an island empire gleaming with gold and silver that supposedly vanished beneath the waves in a single terrifying day and night. But right off the bat, we have to tackle the absolute central question of this whole explainer. Did this glittering empire actually exist, or was it quite literally just the ultimate philosophical thought experiment born in the mind of one Greek philosopher? It's a question that still totally captivates us today, because Atlantis is so much more than just a shipwreck tale. It's basically a mirror held up to every civilization that has ever dared to think of itself as invincible. So to untangle this massive mystery, we're going to break it down into 5 parts: the origin, the mutation, the occult, the science, and finally, the psychology. Starting with part 1, the origin, and Plato's original warning. Our story doesn't actually begin underwater. It starts in the marble colonnades of ancient Athens around 360 BC. That's where the philosopher Plato wrote 2 dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias. And here's the kicker. These works are literally the sole ancient source for this entire mystery. Plato claimed the story was passed down from Egyptian priests to an Athenian lawmaker named Solon, describing a wild event that supposedly happened 9,000 years before their time. But see, Plato wasn't trying to write a history textbook here. He was creating a philosophical mirror to warn his fellow Greeks. On one side, he sets up this virtuous Athens, a society completely dedicated to wisdom, courage, and temperance. And on the exact opposite side, you have corrupt Atlantis. They represented unchecked imperialism, massive material excess, and just this insatiable thirst for power. He was basically waving a giant red flag about the dangers of imperial hubris, especially after Athens had just suffered its own disastrous overreach in the Peloponnesian War. To really hammer home how big of a threat Atlantis was supposed to be, Plato claimed they had a military force of over 1 million men. He said the island was larger than Libya and Asia put together. He describes these massive concentric rings of water and land, monumental temples coated in solid silver and gold, and walls gleaming with a mysterious metal called orichalcum. The sheer, completely absurd scale of these numbers wasn't meant to be a historical census. It was a theoretical construct meant to totally awe the reader. And you know what? Even back in antiquity, people totally got what Plato was doing. His own star student Aristotle basically laughed it off as a pedagogical tool. He categorically dismissed it with this incredibly blunt quote, "The man who dreamed it up made it vanish." For centuries in the ancient Mediterranean, pretty much everyone understood that Atlantis was just a brilliant piece of fiction. Which brings us to part 2, the mutation, or how this very clear myth somehow became history. If we follow the timeline, these texts were essentially lost to Western Europe during the Middle Ages, but when they resurfaced during the Renaissance, the metaphorical warnings started to mutate. In 1484, Marsilio Ficino translates Plato's works into Latin, giving Europeans the full narrative right as they were discovering the Americas. Fast forward to 1882, and an American politician named Ignatius Donnelly publishes a wildly popular book called Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. And man, that book changed everything. Donnelly basically cherry-picked superficial similarities between different global cultures and claimed they were all just survivors from a destroyed Atlantean motherland. He'd look at pyramids in Egypt and Mexico, point to shared global flood myths, or highlight advanced metallurgy across different continents and say, "See? Atlantis." Now, modern archaeologists know for a fact these cultures developed entirely on their own. But for Victorian readers, dealing with the crazy, dizzying pace of the Industrial Revolution, this grand unified theory of human history was incredibly seductive. All right, let's move into part 3, the occult and the era of crystals, mystics, and occultists. After Donnelly's book blew up, alternative spiritual movements in the late 19th and early 20th centuries hijacked the narrative entirely. Enter Helena Blavatsky, a Russian aristocrat who founded Theosophy. She claimed she had access to hidden Himalayan wisdom and introduced this wild concept of root races. According to her, Atlanteans were this highly evolved, spiritually advanced epoch that lived millions of years ago. She said they literally used crystal vibrations and spiritual energy to power flying vehicles. So suddenly, Atlantis wasn't a Bronze Age naval power anymore. It was a full-blown sci-fi spiritual utopia. Then, in the 1920s and 30s, the American psychic Edgar Cayce solidified this occult vision. Known as the Sleeping Prophet,
Casey gave readings claiming Atlantis was destroyed around 10,500 BC because they terribly misused massive power crystals. He even predicted that reincarnated Atlantean souls were coming back to the 20th century to fix their ancient mistakes, and that hidden records of their entire civilization would soon be found in Egypt and the Bahamas.
Okay, let's bring it back to reality with part 4, the science, and the actual archaeological reality. Because while psychics were predicting crystal submarines, actual scientists were finally getting the tools to map the ocean floor. And that they found unequivocally prove there is absolutely no sunken continent in the Atlantic. Detailed mapping showed deep abyssal plains, dropping 3,000 to 4,000 meters down. Core samples showed continuous, undisturbed sediment layers going back millions of years. Plus, the discovery of the mid-Atlantic ridge proved the seafloor is actually spreading apart, not swallowing giant landmasses. The geology literally just does not allow for Plato's story to be true. But here's the fascinating part. Science did find a very likely real-world inspiration for Plato's allegory. Around 1600 BC, the Minoan civilization on the island of Santorini was decimated by a massive volcanic eruption, causing a huge regional collapse in the Aegean Sea. That terrifying, very real natural disaster is almost certainly the historical echo Plato borrowed. He just took that seed of truth, pushed the date back to 9,500 BC, and blew the scale up into a global empire in the Atlantic Ocean to make his philosophical point.
Oh, and those physical ruins Edgar Cayce said we'd find in the Bahamas? Well, in 1968, people did find something called the Bimini Road, these rectangular stone blocks underwater arranged in straight lines. But geologists quickly burst that bubble. They proved it was just naturally fracturing limestone caused by regular geological stress and chemical weathering. Turns out, nature is perfectly capable of making straight lines all on its own. So that leads us to our final chapter. Part 5, the psychology and why we still believe. If geology and archaeology have so thoroughly debunked this, why on earth is Atlantis still a massive pop culture juggernaut today? Honestly, it survives because it serves a really deep psychological purpose for us. We project our own intense, modern fears of ecological disaster and technological collapse right onto this fictional ancient society. In a fragmented modern world, the idea of lost wisdom is incredibly comforting. And for a lot of folks, believing in Atlantis is just a way to express a deep distrust of established institutions. It's a gripping story about a golden age destroyed by its own hubris, and frankly, that's a story we feel like we really need right now. The myth endures because it's a stark reminder of just how fragile our own progress actually is. It makes you look at our skyscrapers and smartphones and wonder, if our civilization vanished beneath the waves tomorrow, what spectacular myths would the future invent to explain our fall? Thank you so much for joining me.